All right. Well, thank you all three of you for joining me, and thank you to the folks attending in the audience tonight. I think this is obviously such an important topic always, but it's really been brought to our attention today, with the murder of George Floyd and the weeks of protests now. There's a clear demand that we transform this to some kind of meaningful action and lasting results. And as we were discussing just before a few minutes ago, Silvia, you were saying how important it is that we just have these discussions, and more than that, of course, also begin to drive them towards substantive changes that will improve our society in every aspect: culture, economy, legal laws, and policing. So I'm thrilled to have you guys here tonight. We only have an hour, and it'll go by really fast. So I don't want to waste too much time. And let me start by just introducing you guys. I'll say a little bit about each one of you, and then feel free to add in more about why this topic is important to you. Let's try to keep it to a minute. Silvia, I'll start with you. Silvia is the Executive Director of the Resource Center for Nonviolence, which is really continuing the legacy of Martin Luther King about peaceful protests, and also, as I just mentioned, how to transform protest into substantive action. Silvia, do you want to talk just briefly a little bit about your work that you're doing now?
Yeah, it can be an overwhelming topic when we start to talk about social justice and the change that we can use in our society. One of the things that really excites me about being in this position is that regardless of where people are in their understanding of race, racism, inequality, however you want to frame it, the critical thing is to hold spaces for discussion and understanding. It's a really long path to go from beginning to unpack this whole concept of inequality wrapped in racism, and to take it from that to actually making some policy changes. That's like going from here to Mars. Mm-hmm. There's lots of stuff that needs to happen in between, and we haven't really spent the time, resources, or energy. We don't really know how to get there for the most part. Many people don't, but it starts with opening up a space just to be in the same room to entertain the idea. But if we refuse to get in the same spaces with one another, then we can't even begin the process. So that's why I like the work that I do, and that's why I'm here today, to provide that, to be in the space, to lend my understanding and move forward. That's
fantastic. Yeah, thank you for reminding us, first of all, how difficult the work is ahead, but also that it's great that we're just showing up and starting it here today. Deutron. Deutron is the executive director of a nonprofit called Mentors, which helps both boys find mentors and turn into men, and also men to become better fathers. And there's a lot of work involved that overlaps with the probation system and the criminal justice system. And so I think you can definitely provide a lot of context here for us. Deutron, you want to talk a little bit more about the work you're doing? And
Sure. So with Mentors, Driving Change for Boys, Men, and Fathers, a newer organization about 3 years old. And one of the reasons that inspired me in forming that organization is really my decade of work around working with fathers and really seeing the family break down the issues and the trauma that has existed in our community regardless of color, but we see it in areas of color much strongly, and even with police involvement around custody, removal of children. So, and prior to that, I did work with foster youth. So I have now for 20 years been witnessing in my community how things are a little bit better, but also the same. And my background is electrical engineering. So I'm looking at this from system change and really looking at it, how we could do. So you see in my evolution in the work that I do, each time I'm trying to understand the X factor. Of course, the X factor in this case is humans, right? We're complex. Our environment, our upbringing, our position in society, the skin of our colors, it does impact how we climb the mobility and equity ladder that we see. So in my work, I have seen conflict is a normal part of work. Every day I have a conflict with my 3-year-old. So I don't shy away. So, you know, a wise mentor of mine once said, you know, conflict creates an opportunity from breakdown to breakthrough. So I think that's what we're seeing an opportunity for breakthrough if we seize the moment. And the first stage, like Silvia said, is conversation. So, and trying to understand one another in parenting, you have to do that. Even if it's a 3-year-old, if I don't acknowledge and validate my little girl, then what kind of woman I want her to be? The one that's ignored, not paid attention to, told what to do, or from early age, starting to implant those ideas of she is a little human person who has all the right and privilege and needs to be heard and accommodated in a way that supports her development. So, you know, as a parent, I have a different perspective about this. So that's another layer that I'm gonna hope to bring in. So
Awesome.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, you really have to get to a problem before you can get through it. And I think it's also so awesome that you have moved into this work from electrical engineering and can bring an engineering mindset to it as well. That's cool. Craig Wilson has been in, or recently retired, but was in law enforcement for 33 years. Is that right?
Yes.
And right towards the end of your career, you served as undersheriff for corrections, right? So help us understand, you know, what does that mean that, you know, what kind of oversight did you have over the corrections department? You know, help us understand your role there.
Yeah. So I retired a few months ago. I was the undersheriff, not of corrections, but of all the operational aspects of the sheriff's office, corrections, operations, and administration. So I was essentially an assistant sheriff to Sheriff Hart. And to me, law enforcement was a vocation. Even though I'm retired, I continue to watch closely the developments and be very concerned both locally at a state level and nationally about what's happening. And this is a tremendous opportunity right now to pull something better out of these systems that we have. The systems aren't serving us correctly when these kind of things happen. And the sad thing is, you know, this isn't new. This has been going on for hundreds of years. And, you know, in 2014, we saw this come up with many, many cases of persons that shouldn't have died, an arrest-related death or death in custody. And there was an opportunity there too, and it stalled. And I'm hoping this time that this reform can be more meaningful. And I think the energy is there.
Thank you. Yeah. And I should say, I think you're also the perfect representative from law enforcement to be here tonight, precisely because you're not actively in a department. You don't have any, you know, politics to deal with, but you can still be an incredible subject matter expert and, you know, also just bring that experience and that passion. So I can't thank you enough for being here. And actually with that, I'm going to jump into just a few slides that we can go through to ground us in some data. And a lot of this comes from data that actually Craig shared with me that's available at our sheriff's website, but let me just pull this up and we'll get into it. Great. Can you see this agenda page?
Mhm.
Yes.
Yep.
So we'll talk a little bit about equality and justice in policing, then about economic equality, and we'll open it up for audience questions. And you can use the Q&A function in Zoom to ask questions. So to get started, I think it's important, first of all, to ground us in, we're talking about racial equality. So important to understand what the demographics of our county are, just so we can kind of know what baseline is. So this is straight from the census website, 56.9% white, 34.1% Hispanic, 1.4% Black, 5.2% Asian, 2.4% other. So just keep that in mind. As I mentioned, Craig made me aware that there's a lot of really great work that has been done really recently in the Sheriff's Department to bring us up to a modern standard of policing, to be more transparent with the community, to shift towards community-based models of law enforcement. And so this was a report done in August 2016. And if you go to this website, scsheriff.com, there's actually really up-to-the-month data on pretty much everything related to the operations of the Sheriff's Department. So right now we're looking at May 2020 because June is not done yet, but nevertheless we have information that's that recent. So, of course, a lot of people, given the circumstances, are concerned about, well, what does use of force look like here in our county? And you can see that use of force per 1,000 calls for service happened 3.7 times in May of 2020, so this last month, and an average is about 4 times per month. And then down here, type of force used, you can see that the conducted energy device with 6 total here, that's a taser, was used most frequently, and the carotid control hold was used once in really the last year since June 2019. Anything you want to add to that, Craig?
One of the most important things about the reform that we started in 2015, and it's still ongoing, is that not only did we make a lot of the data immediately available to the public, because there's a lot more than what you see here on the slide, there's things behind the data. So for example, we instituted an executive management use of force review on a monthly basis. So on the use of force cases, I can see that last month they reviewed 36 cases. That's all force used by the Sheriff's Office. So not only is a supervisor reviewing it on a daily basis when they look at reports or go to a scene, a chief deputy is leading the use of force review and looking at each individualized case. We're the size of an agency that we can have that kind of attention on this kind of thing.
Got it. Thank you. Yeah, there is a ton of data here. I've got just a couple more that I've pulled that we can look at. So we have demographic stop data, right? So of course there's concerns over, well, are we racially profiling people? And if we look at the demographic stop data over the 12-month average here, you can see white males, 38.6%, white females, 14.8%. So 52%, right, compared to, was it 56% for the county? Hispanic males, 31.2%, Hispanic females, 7%, so 38% total. Black males, 2.39, Black females, 0.78. So, it's not perfect, obviously, as far as a perfect match in terms of what our overall demographics look like, but, it also doesn't seem wildly out of whack either. Let's see, and then hiring demographics, obviously, we want our law enforcement to look like the people that they're hired to serve and protect. You can see here in the deputy sheriffs, the white officers 70.4%, Hispanic officers 18.5%, Black officers 11.1%. A lot more men than women, 92.6% male, 7.4% female. And then corrections officer is a little bit more Hispanic heavy, 47.4% of corrections officers hired in the last year are Hispanic, 36.8% white, 10.5% Black. So, you know, again, some potential work to do there. And then a snapshot of inmates in the jail today. And here I've graphed it against the actual demographics for the county. So you can see this black bar is inmates, 41.7% of the inmates in the jail are white compared to 56.9% of the population, 48% Hispanic, 8% Black compared to 1.4% of the population, 1% Asian. So a little more discrepancy here begins to emerge. That's what I have for the data on out of the Sheriff's Department today. You know, again, Craig, do you want to comment further about any of that?
I think that when you see that, you know, the Black population in this county being less than 2% and 8% in the jail, I think that we need to figure out what's going on there. Mm-hmm. You know, in absolute numbers, it's a relatively small number, but it's 25 individuals and every individual counts. So whether it was 2,500, what was the percentage, or 25? It's time to take a look at that now, and with Hispanics too, and find out why these rates are so different. I will say that these numbers changed around a little bit with some COVID-19 related procedures to reduce the number of arrests, and the arrest rate in this county has been halved since COVID-19. The jail population was running close to 600 in the system-wide here. It's now a lot closer to 300. If we can remove half the jail population safely in this county with COVID-19, there's probably some, these are policies we should stick with, and we shouldn't just repopulate the jail the same as it was when this goes back. If people can be out of custody safely, that's the proof there. Mm-hmm. That the system needs some fine tuning here. We need to figure out what's going on with that overrepresented Black population in custody. And I met with Sheriff Hart today and talked about many things reform related. And he too is going to be is interested in this and will be undertaking an effort about this. He assured me.
Mm-hmm. Great. Deutron, Silvia, do you have anything you want to comment about?
I was wondering if these numbers include juvenile hall?
No, this is the adult system. The juvenile system is run as a complete separate system by the probation department, and the numbers are a lot different. They usually have about a dozen to 16 youths in custody. They used to have close to 60, 70 about 10 years ago. A series of very concerted efforts reduced the juvenile hall population and safely. You know, juvenile crime, we didn't, that coincided with some of the lowest crime rates that this county has seen for decades. So it just goes to show you that there's a lot of room there to improve in our system, and like now is the time to do that.
Yeah. Well, you know, of course, a big call being made by a lot of activists today is to see a transfer of funds from, you know, the Sheriff's Department and corrections to social services. And so, you know, the other couple slides here I have, I want to give us some grounding in what the funding looks like today. So this is the budget for the entire county in public safety and justice. And the Sheriff-Coroner line here is at the bottom, 90 million recommended for the 2021 budget cycle. This has not been really corrected for COVID yet. That's, you know, our county government's actually going to come back. They're doing one set of budget hearings now, and they're going to come back in August to look at the budget again to see, you know, what additional action needs to be taken or how it needs to be modified based on how the situation has evolved. But this is the latest data that's available now. So 90 million for the Sheriff's Department, 12.6 million for the Public Defender, 28.7 million for probation, which I believe that's where the funds for juvenile hall come from. And maybe the other related to justice and crime here is 21 million for the district attorney. So, you know, I have to say, like, when I was just looking at these numbers, even, you know, originally I was thinking about the budget here for Sheriff-Coroner, since that also includes the main jail. But, you know, I thought even public defender or the DA, you know, the last time I was called up for jury duty, you know, we had, it was a case involving a Black woman who was arrested at a church for entering the church, looking for a place to sleep at night. And then the officer that came to arrest her, you know, she resisted arrest and beat on his chest. And so the charge was, you know, battery of an officer. And we had, you know, 50 potential jurors there being selected until 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And it occurs to me that, you know, that was, I think it did a basic calculation. If everyone's making about $25 an hour and we were there starting at 9 in the morning, I mean, that cost just in jury time around $5,000. How much did it cost then in legal time as well? And so it occurs to me, well, if we're so profoundly wasting people's time, the jury's time, maybe we're also profoundly wasting legal resources as well. And that even public defender or district attorney could be sources that we could potentially reallocate money from. Just an idea that we can discuss. I'll just share a couple more figures here and then we can open it up for discussion again. Here's the Sheriff-Coroner's budget in detail. So I think that it seems to me like, as far as trying to understand what how budget is breaking down between operations and corrections, you know, about 41% of the staff budget is going to corrections. So is it fair to say, Craig, that 40% of the Sheriff-Coroner budget is corrections and the rest is, you know, deputies?
It might be a little higher than that. None of the police departments operate a jail system, so the sheriff is responsible for that. So it's a little bit closer to half of the budget going to corrections overall. There's food costs, 24-hour costs, as you can imagine. And then about the other half goes to operations and administration.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Okay, and then just to, I wanted to share this quote. This was on Andy Mills' blog, right? Mental health calls. You know, this is a quote from Andy Mills. I recently spoke with a sergeant about defunding, and he said, if someone could take the homeless issue entirely from us and stop us from responding to mental health calls, please take the money. And, you know, again, I don't think there's any comment about the job that the Sheriff's Department is doing or the police. I know when I did a ride along with the deputies, we did spend at least half the day addressing people experiencing homelessness. You know, moving them from one place to well, not to another, because there was no place to take them, right? So it seems like we're spending a lot of money for people to, you know, carry a leaky bucket, if you will, and we're not really moving any water. You know, and then just to compare that to what it would cost to actually house people, right? More and more we're seeing the advocacy for tiny homes or pallet homes. Housing Matters, the formerly known as the Homeless Services Center, recently put in 10 of these pallet homes at $8,000 per shelter. You know, there's 2,200 people experiencing homelessness in the county. Multiply those two numbers together, you get 17.6 million, and every person experiencing homelessness gets a shelter of some kind. I'm not saying it's the solution, but it just, to put it in context, again, you know, I think this is what people are responding to or looking to when we talk about you know, defunding or restructuring law enforcement. So with that, I want to turn it back over to you guys. Just some thoughts on this data, and what do you think about these calls for restructuring and changing the way that we spend this money? Is it doable, or is really everything that we're looking at necessary? What parts of this and what?
So can I start? Is
Yes.
that possible? Okay. Sorry, there's a background noise, so let me know if it's mine. So I think it's good to ground ourselves on data, and data can only speak in certain ways, interpretation, right? So in this county, as an African American who came here to go to school and decided to stay in this county because I love it, I care about it, and I want to make it better, I look at who's impacted. And the large majority of it is not the 1.4% African Americans. Yes, some of them are impacted. You can see it in the jail population, but we also have our brown families who are impacted tremendously. And they're over proportionately in jail. And my experience speaking and working with them is the relationship they have with police is different. So you have three other players in policing. You have the jurisdictional city polices, you have the sheriffs, and then you have highway patrol as well, because that's another area where incidents happen where people get in trouble. So I think about those population and how they're being served. And then I ask myself, well, 80, 90 million sheriff's budget, what would be the health and human services budget? And really look at, so if we're having a leaky bucket, because we're constantly doing an intervention, there is not a prevention model that is systematically implemented, funded appropriately. And the only example that I can point out, to be honest with you, is probation. Currently, I'm a part of a probation collaborative, the Probation Service Center, that is co-locating services in one roof and making sure that public and private agencies are working together to address all the needs of client, not just the probation, but housing, mental health, drug and alcohol, parenting. So that way, the individual doesn't have to go to 7 different places to get the service they need. They go to one place, they get to see their probation officer. So you have systems. This is not unique to Santa Cruz County. We have seen it in other places. But what you're hearing, the roar that you're hearing, is when a life is being taken in a way it has been. I think I would roar, not just because it's black, it's white, it's brown, it's yellow, it doesn't matter, blue. I will roar because it's not in dignity and respect that we expect from ourselves. So there's something systematically wrong, and we keep avoiding it. And to be honest with you, COVID-19 is a gift to us in a way, because it has forced us to confront and look at this. Because if COVID-19 wasn't here, I think it would just be another blip in the news and we wouldn't have done this. That's my 2 cents so far.
Got it. Yeah, it does seem like the probation department, it seems to be something that we're doing relatively well, right? I mean, to your point, Craig, we've moved, instead of now if 60 people in juvenile hall at any given time, there's now 10. And at the same time, though, we are maintaining the same facilities that we were for 60 people, right? So my question there is, how do we actually kind of reap the benefit of those improved programs, right? I mean, we're actually actively talking about increasing investment in the juvenile hall facility, putting another, I think it's close to $15 million between renovating the kitchen and adding a gym. And those are good things that you would want any youth to have. But having actually visited juvenile hall, I have to say, it is a jail, right? And you walk through 2 sets of doors and are surrounded by cinder blocks and a wall. And at the end of the day, I don't know that it's the most best environment to really for someone a youth to turn the corner. So is there an opportunity to maybe change that facility to something else, or recoup some of the benefits that we've seen in the probation department? Craig?
I want to speak a little bit too, if I can.
Sure.
I think it's really interesting. Part of what you just showed us, I saw the statistics, but then I'm also thinking about what about our education system? How about those places where our youth are not only abandoned but not served? I used to work with at-risk youth, and we started that work. I did that work in San Jose, in East San Jose, and the programs begin in 3rd grade. You can start seeing tendencies and or risk very early on, and the prevention is minimal. I would say in a group of 50 kids, I ran an after-school program with some pretty challenging cases. I would say maybe 2 or 3 of them really benefited long-term out of 50. And that's just me, one person doing the best I could. And now that I've had the opportunity to raise my children in this county, and they've had the luxury of going to decent schools, even within those systems, and even with 2 parents that have a lot of privilege and a lot of education and able to navigate all kinds of situations, there are still so many ways, I can count over and over, so many ways that our kids of color are criminalized, not only within our school system, but within the very programs that are supposed to be serving them. And a lot of it just goes under the radar. It's very sort of normal, natural, and it happens at all kinds of levels. It's pretty much invisible. So I hear the numbers that you're talking about, and I see the disparities, especially in our African-American communities, and I think about how many of those kids just didn't have a chance. They just didn't have the opportunity. They didn't have the family structure or the opportunities within their schools to really be elevated. And then another dynamic that I really see that's really prominent is this sort of rush to medicate our kids when they exhibit behaviors that are not necessarily school conducive. Maybe they have higher energy levels, maybe they're experiencing trauma in the home. So even the way that we're looking at behavior within those systems, there's really little opportunity to address it and to heal it in order for them to be able to learn and stay out of our juvenile justice systems. I know I took it out of the policing, but I do believe that if we only look at each individual system in isolation, it really doesn't, it's important, but we have to look beyond that. And I know the police department understands the need for that, because I grew up in a school system that was heavily policed. So on the enforcement end, they're very keen to be present and perpetuate a certain environment that I don't believe is conducive to learning. But now that we're talking about prevention, how can we also visit those programs that are designed to enforce and police our school children and perhaps do things a little bit differently?
Right, so you're suggesting just a program that's able to catch early issues early on, and that invest in maybe something like mentors and mentoring youth early. Do you have any suggestions on like how you would fund such a program, or what would it look like? Are you suggesting that we take some of the juvenile hall funds and put it towards this kind of early detection and education system?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think you have an opportunity. So look at it in system, and thank you, Sylvia, for bringing education. And in the work I have done looking at fathers and intervening when we do, it reminds me of Frederick Douglass's quote I had on my door, which breaks my heart in one hand, but it really speaks truth. It says it's easier to build stronger children than to repair a broken man. So it really goes, which is the essence of some of the work of mentors, is if I tell you my boys in South County compared to North County, the difference in resources they have, it's tremendous. And the kids who are coming to my group in North County are a different caliber of kids than the kids who are being redirected in my South County group. And I am happy to deal with that issue, because guess what? If somebody's there on a weekly basis, talking to them, trying to understand, validating their feeling, but there's a sense once they get labeled, you have heard the expression from, from what is it? From middle school to college, or middle school to jail pipeline. It's not really a joke. I see my boys being high, being disrespectful to teachers, struggling to make it. And then I am asking, okay, that's what I'm seeing. What is underneath the iceberg? What's going on? Why are they feeling this? And when they speak, I mean, we talk about listening to each other as adults, but we have not even asked kids of Black and brown and even white, how are they feeling in their schools? And if you look at a lot of the data, they don't feel safe. They don't feel heard. They don't feel the educational system in a way addresses their need. They have to go, to all these classes. So it's not just the educational piece. I think the social emotional development piece is not being nurtured. So what I would say is there isn't one pill or one organization you can give the funding to. I would not believe in that. You need to have a combination of organization working in a safety net manner that looks at leadership, that looks at social emotional development, that looks at gender specific services. Our boys are failing at a higher rate than our girls. And these are the boys who are going to become young men, who are going to become men, who are going to become fathers, who are going to have resentment issues because what they were promised as a man, it doesn't exist any longer, or what their fathers and grandfathers experienced, it doesn't, which is in one hand good because we have come a long way in creating gender equality, but at the same time, we're ignoring a generation of boys who don't know how to deal with their masculinity. To me, what I saw happen to George Floyd and that police officer in the neck of it, it's a toxic masculinity that at play, and that's the question. That's the question, as one human being to another, what was going on in his mind? And I had to reflect, have I ever been in a situation like that where I have lost my cool and my humanity that I would do something like that? So part of this is not just moving one bucket of funding from one place to another, but really listening and really looking at who should be part of this conversation. And one of the things that I would strongly encourage is young people need to be listened to this as well. Asking them where would they like to see some resources going, not just the adults, but they have some ideas. I mean, and juvenile hall, in my opinion, there is a movement to close it down. I hope it gets closed down because that's not the way we should be raising our young people. There's other corrective methods that could be employed in a way that we can use that resource, that facility in different ways. And the existing judge currently is doing some great, the chief of probation is doing some great innovative way. So we're seeing changes. It just, we haven't seen it in the policing and sheriff realm. At least I haven't seen it. I have seen a change in the sheriff's department with the correction facility in Roundtree. It was an amazing move, and then reset it back, which I don't understand why, because I think that was 21st century corrections, if you want to speak about something. Really, instead of just incarcerating people and leaving them, but helping them to program while they're incarcerated about, their behavior, attitude, and the way they can make their life different. That was an opportunity, but things have changed, and I'm hoping that the new sheriffs will swing the other way, and really programming I think is important in custody, because it makes a huge difference when people come out. So I'll give opportunity to others.
I just want to, Manu, I just want to address something that stood out to me really right away, Deutron, as soon as
to Deutron's point about failing young men, I just want to show or point out that in the jail, it actually is 90.7% men. And I don't know if that is, Craig, correct me if that's just a result of, a large number of folks that we've released because of COVID, and then whatever, the more violent criminals are men. But I suspect that that is a pretty strong trend in corrections in general, right?
Well, I want to make I want to connect 2 points that I think will go a long way in. I don't know if I'm saying something new to everyone. For some of you, this might be the first time you're hearing it. And Deutron, you're alluding to it, but I don't think you're really going to the heart. And something that I've learned from my personal experience, and then also studying racism as a system. Racism has this sort of, it goes straight to the heart of destroying families. Because when you don't provide it, the whole demasculinization of the male is central. When a man in our society doesn't have the opportunity to raise his family, and Martin Luther King spoke about this, and so did many other civil rights activists. When that opportunity is taken away from a family, that destroys the whole family. And the only way that you can equip a male or a female to live a decent life is to provide them an adequate education. Without an adequate education, there is nothing there. There is nothing there but criminality. There's nothing there but depression and isolation, and perhaps even a good amount of mental illness. So we can't look at criminality in isolation without looking at all these other impacts. And the destruction of the family is so critical. It's just so, how would I say? It's an incredibly difficult thing to escape when you're trying to raise a family in an impoverished community. I mean, it's a miracle if you get out of there as a whole person.
Yeah.
And if you've never lived in those circumstances, you don't know. But for those of you that have, and that have actually made it out, educated and healthy and joyful, it's not easy.
Every day is a blessing.
Yeah.
And to your point that there really is a mental and self-worth component too. I mean, if you look at the programs that are working locally in homelessness, it is jobs-based programs like the Homeless Garden Project, like the Downtown Streets team, precisely because it allows people to feel a sense of self-worth again. Mm-hmm. And so, as you said, education plays a role in that. Having productive opportunities to contribute, it plays a role in that. So I think that's a key point. Craig, I want to bring it back to you and give you a chance to respond to some of this. And let's say, for example, I do want to also start answering some audience questions. So we've got one here: can we reallocate funds and provide more funding for prevention? So, let's say I came to you and said, all right, Craig, we got to reallocate 30% of the budget, the sheriff's office current budget to, housing and education, et cetera. How would you do that? Where would you see an opportunity to make those cuts? And then what would you need to know was happening on the other side of what those programs were accomplishing so that it was actually a fair shake, so to speak, right? I mean, because obviously if you just make cuts, but, you know, spend the money on programs that aren't effective, well, then you're not actually reducing the job of the sheriff's department. You're just making, you know, their lives more impossible. So, you know, what metrics would you need to see from those programs to know that that they were in fact going to ultimately reduce the burden?
I'm not really qualified to answer that that part of the question, Manu. But if you came in a theoretical, you know, and you wanted 30% out of that budget, you're going to see a reduction in a lot of discretionary activities. And jail programming may be part of that, because you can't get a 30%. You can't pull that kind of money out of a system without having some major impacts. I mean, it can be done. Of course, it can be done. It's just a matter of what, you know, what impacts you'll have, what you'll lose out of that. So,
and what, you know, and what if it, you know, even 10%, right? I mean, we saw that, hey, we could essentially house every person experiencing homelessness in Santa Cruz County for $16.7 million. So what if we just said, okay, we're going to take $9 million a year out of this budget, and we're going to make sure that these people are housed, and that should free up a lot of your time, right?
$9 million is a lot of money. And obviously those details would be at like what you're willing to give up in the way of services that law enforcement providing now in the county unincorporated area. So it would come down to that. What are you willing to give up here to do something on that side?
Mm-hmm. Can you give us a sense of what we'd have to give up?
Well, you can't get that kind of money. You know, close to 90% of that entire budget is staff based. It's not equipment based. So you're going to lose positions. So you'd probably lose jail programming, some of it. You'd probably lose some drug enforcement. You know, that's essentially discretionary these days, since the state's not providing any money to do that. So you might have to reduce your investigations group. It's very intensive staff area. So you'd lose some real services when you take that kind of money out of a system. And I believe, you know, the county's looking at a pretty significant removal, but not to give it somewhere else. It's just to deal with the impacts of this crisis.
Absolutely, with COVID. Another audience question, what prevention programs does the Sheriff's Department currently offer teens and preteens? Are there any?
There are a few. There's the Sheriff's Activity League that works with kids, gets them baseball and soccer and sometimes surfing, depending on what the expertise level is. But really, most youth activity is not coming out of the Sheriff's Office. It's coming out of the probation department and the community-based organization partners that work with them. The sheriff is very much involved in the adult system. They have school resource officers at the high schools. That's a place where there's interaction. Silvia talked a little bit about that.
Did you ask me to, or you said I did?
You did. You mentioned that in some school districts, the police have a heavy presence on the campus.
Yeah.
So, you know, do you think that maybe Sylvia, do you think the issue with those programs today is precisely that it feels like a heavy hand by the police? Or, you know, I mean,
it's hard to say, because some of those schools where police are present, I mean, I experienced this directly myself, is they're not necessarily safe for the students that are in them. And oftentimes you do see intervention that is necessary. That comes, I mean, those schools that have those issues are schools that are impoverished, and impoverished communities have violence at the center. So of course you're going to have violent incidents in schools. I think when you start dealing with the poverty, you're going to see the reduction in those incidents, and you probably don't need police anymore.
And Manu, you got to think of the investment, the return on investment between prevention and intervention services. For every dollar that you put in in prevention, you get $9 back that you don't have to use in intervention. So the math works, but I think we're not willing, when it comes to the purse or wallet, we're not willing to look at, it's not about giving, the money. It's more about looking at what's the best impact. So police or sheriff didn't get to this point overnight. It's over a period of time, started with school, maybe started with a conflict, it started with homeless. Slowly, we keep deferring more and more responsibility. So I think go back to the core function of the police and sheriff. Start with that and then ask the question, if we're gonna move this, who's gonna step up in a concrete, measurable way to address that, and you attach that to the funding. If it doesn't get delivered, then you go back or you go look at another model. I'm sorry, I'm having really hard time how we're having hard time in trying to understand this. You know what I mean? It's just, if people are poor, I had a dad who I was working in probation, and the first thing I ask is, I say, here's my story, tell me your story. He got arrested because he stole a diaper for his kid. Okay? Stole a diaper for his kid. If I didn't have a diaper for my daughter, how many people are on my phone who I can call and ask for a diaper and who will deliver it in a heartbeat to me? So that speaks to isolation, not being able to access resources, feeling lonely, and feeling that it's your responsibility to take care of your family at all costs. So when people are in that survival mode, talking about crime is irrelevant. They're trying to survive. So how do basic needs are met? So housing is that. Employment. For men, employment have a huge influence on their self-worth and providing for their family. So I think, how are we in this county? Labor cost is low, housing is tremendously high. So there's already disjoint, out the door. So it's like, even if we were trying to lift people out, it's just the affordability factor doesn't exist for people to even rent, try to own, feel like they're moving up the economical ladder. It doesn't. Yeah, you can give them a housing and you can house them from homeless. That would work. That's a solution. But what about the mental health? What about the substance abuse? What about the family that's being left because that dad or man, it's no longer providing for his family? So it's just, I think, a larger conversation needs to take place, and our peace officer partners have to be there in a way of offering more resources to redirect their own resources. They know, Craig and his team and the sheriffs, they know where there's an opportunity, and starting with them without impacting immediate services. Where they see an opportunity, and they may say they're doing that, but ask them to do that fivefold. Could you do that fivefold? And let's work together, because ultimately I would want the sheriffs and police department to focus on what they do best, which is safety. The rest, I don't want them to deal with homeless. I don't want them to deal in schools. I don't want them to deal with family conflict. I don't want them to do that because they're not equipped or prepared to do that. But they're doing that because we have put in that burden on them. So, I call on our leaders to think about how to solve that, which you hopefully you're doing that.
Great. Yeah, I want to thank you, Deutron. And I will use that opportunity to answer this question, which says that they are asking me where I stand and where I'm trying to put work and research into. And I want to touch on a couple things there. First off, I think I do want to understand, how this, if we were going to restructure policing, or what does that look like? And to Deutron's question to you, Craig, if any system that is going to work should be able to work on a small scale, right? So, I threw 30% out there as a challenge, but, let's say it is $1.5 million, right? Maybe that's more manageable. If it works, if it's going to work, it should show results, right? And so what would that program look like? And so I'm hoping to get some sense of that from this conversation and more like it. And so I'm putting research and energy there. And then the other piece of it that Deutron mentioned was the economic opportunity. And I was worried that we weren't going to get to talk about that at all. And it seems like that is going to have to be the topic for an entirely new panel. But I was struck on listening to NPR just yesterday about how when General Sherman freed the slaves in the South and asked them, "All right, guys, you're free. What does freedom look like to you?" And basically, they said, "Give us land. We need land to be the masters of our fate." And I think that's still true today, right? We have way too many people living in, to be hyperbolic, rent slavery, not being able to save money, not being able to get ahead. And so we really do need to look at ways to create more opportunities for people to buy housing, whether that's, legalizing tiny homes would be an easy first step, allowing a certain number of tiny homes per acre in the county on agricultural land. Maybe, heck, agricultural workers could even invest in their tiny home and then invest in this plot of land and put those two together. Whatever it is, I think that there's a lot of ways we can look at improving economic opportunity around housing. So those are the things I'm working on. And clearly this is, as we're running out of time, the beginning of a much longer conversation. And Silvia, as you prepared us for, just showing up is the first step, and it's going to continue. But Craig, I do want to give you one more opportunity to respond there. If let's say it was $1.5 million, where would you take that away from? And what would you want to see? What kind of a program would begin to, would it be housing? Would it be housing the homeless if that's, where you're getting the most calls for service?
I think that between mental health related issues that aren't violent and homelessness, if those two issues would come off as primary responsibilities of the police, essentially, to respond to these all the time, that you could probably get savings like that out of there. A tremendous amount of staff time is going to calls regarding homeless and people who other people are saying are having mental health problems. It's such a generic term. But those are two areas that the police spend inordinate amounts of time on that are ripe for doing something different. As Deutron mentioned, there's people that are better equipped to handle non-violent people that have those kinds of problems than the police.
Mm-hmm. Great. Yeah, and I know the number of social workers with the county have asked for just something just like that, some kind of crisis response hotline that is that doesn't go to the police or the sheriff. We are pretty much out of time, so I want to just give each of one of you guys an opportunity for a quick closing statement, and then we'll close our session for today. Why don't we start with you? 30 seconds to a minute. What are you leaving this conversation with, and what would you where would you suggest continuing to put energy and research?
Who you were asking? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm asking. Yeah, Silvia.
Sylvia. Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay, just making sure.
I just this whole conversation has really just helped me understand more clearly that even within our education system, our teachers, I've worked with teachers, and the burden is heavy on them, and there's nothing that trains them for the work that's needed. We need to look at those systems with a different lens, and our policing as well. Like, what are we asking of them? And the other idea that, this is going to sound, I don't know, maybe strange to some of you, but impoverished communities are steeped in violence. The people that live there experience it every day, but our police experience it too. I mean, everybody that's in there, it's just perpetuated. So how are we dealing with everybody? I mean, the police as well. Are we giving them any sort of coping for all the criminality that they're exposed to, or all the violence that they have to break up between families and brothers and sisters, and all the ugliness that comes from that? I mean, that's real.
It's true.
I'm not defending any like actions. I'm just asking for a deeper reflection on, you know, what are our communities of color, you know, the lives that are lived, and the people that are in them, and the police that work in those communities. They're all in the same mess together.
I think that's an excellent point. We all suffer being part of a broken system, and so fixing it is to everyone's benefit.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Deutron?
I think I agree with Sylvia. I think, you know, the trauma that's experienced in an environment, both, you know, dealing in a conflict or going to a neighborhood where there's crime and pain and suffrage that's taking place. So, you know, police officers are humans too. You know, they have to carry that burden, and, you know, I assume that badge means something, right? In one hand, it means that they carry it and wear it to protect and serve, and at the same time comes with a huge responsibility that the community has imposed or given to them. I give my part of my right when somebody is a police officer with respect and dignity that I expect in return to happen to me. So every time I see a police officer, that's what I expect, regardless of my color or my behavior or my gender. I expect that because I try to respond back. And so, and I have worked with a lot of sheriffs and a police officer, and, you know, not in an event of being pulled over or anything. So as I think, you know, what I want for this community is, I think, a true examination of not just the statistics, but the reality of what's taking place for disenfranchised and marginalized community. Could be the beach flats to Watsonville, to in every community, there is a pocket of people who don't feel safe in their own neighborhood and the relationship they have with police and with themselves. And how can we uplift them so that way our community is thriving together? Now we're thriving and some are surviving. As long as we have that division, this problem doesn't go away. And, I'll be clear. I think the way we're dealing around services for gender specific services, it's non-existent. So if we don't engage people where they need help for mental health or for anger management or communication, then we're going to deal with it on the other end. So, I appreciate centers like Silvia where dialogue can take place. And if we can do more of that in every neighborhood, not just with people who have to, but with everybody, including our peace officers being part of that conversation to understand deeper and what's going on, I think we can get one step closer. So I feel like we don't have enough gender specific services to address some of the social emotional challenges our boys are experiencing, our young men are facing, and our men are living, and our fathers are dealing with. So I have a vested interest in telling you that because I see it every day, and we have to do something. Domestic violence, it just doesn't happen out of nowhere. It happens because somebody feeling that they can't honor and respect the woman they love or the man they love, so they have to control and do negative things to them. So there's something going on in the social emotional as well as the trauma sphere that we have to address. And if we don't, it just shows up in our neighborhoods, shows up in other places. So thank you for the opportunity to have this dialogue, but you just started with me, so it's not the end of it.
Right. That's right. Thank you, Deutron. Craig, any closing thoughts?
Sylvia and Deutron bring up so many critically important issues. I'm going to change gears slightly and talk about politics for a minute. There's a tremendous opportunity here to do some police reform on a national level. Unfortunately, our elected officials at the federal level are fighting again. And so I really thought that this might rise above some partisanship, because it's got everyone's attention right now, what's going on. But what we're seeing is today, the Democrats and Republicans are stalling on two different justice bills. Republican bill's a little short on substance, and the Democratic bill has a lot more to it. They're not reconciling. If they can't get their act together, this on a national level, this will be squandered. On locally, you're going to see some very proactive reforms occurring in the next year to keep up with where we're at as a society. You have to keep updating your policing model. You're going to see that. You're seeing it now. So locally, we're going to be okay. We're going to put the gas to the pedal there. But I'm afraid that on a national basis, a person of color should be able to drive across the United States and not have to be worried about being killed by a police officer.
Mm-hmm. Excellent point. Yeah, thank you, Craig. I mean, that I know I've in many ways gave up on federal politics long ago. That's why I'm here running for a local office, because it is where we can make the most change, where regions can learn from each other. We can quickly adapt. We can look at what they are doing in whether it's Oakland or Minneapolis or New York City, and we can learn from each other, and the reforms that we make here could be adopted in a city 10 times our size as well. So I think that there is a lot of meaning to making change at this level. And clearly we're just at the beginning here. And thank you to the three of you for helping to get to the issue. I think we got through it a little bit. There's still a lot more to go. And I'll continue to put work into how we can look at reallocating funds in a way that's going to be productive for everyone. Again, I think that Silvia said it best. It's about creating a system that's functional for everyone. There's nothing worse than going to your job and feeling like you're doing something that's broken. And I want the deputies to feel like they're getting up and part of a system that is streamlined and working well too. And part of that means not having to shoulder, the burden of mental health, and not having to just tell people to move along when there's nowhere for them to move along to. And I'm talking to that same person 5 more times that week, 10 more times that week. So we're all in this together. Thank you all for coming out tonight. I'm sorry I didn't get to answer all the questions that were asked on the chat, but feel free to email me at manuforsupervisor@gmail.com or message me on Facebook, and I'm happy to respond that way. So thank you all, and have a good night.
Thank you. Good night.